Hello, everybody. Rob Drummond here from True Story Selling. Welcome to today's webinar, Story Selling for Maze 2.0. I've known about Maze 2.0 for quite a long time. This is a Perry Marshall term. If any of you know Perry, Perry's the author of various books about Google AdWords and marketing, and he's been saying that the way that we advertise on social media needs to be completely rethought. And I've realized recently that I have a solution that taps into this, so I'm really pleased to be presenting this to you tonight. So it's conventional to start all these webinars by talking about my credentials and telling you about who I am and the journey that I've been on. And you know what? At this point, who cares? What you hear about is to learn about the Maze 2.0, why this works on Facebook and other social media platforms. Mostly Facebook, incidentally. I mean, it depends a little bit on who you're trying to sell to, but most of your customers are on Facebook pretty much all the time. So a lot of the stuff we're talking about today will mostly be relevant to Facebook. But the whole point of Maze 2.0 is that you get to appear on other platforms and not pay a huge amount to do it. But I do want to tell you a little bit about who I am. So I'm actually many things. I'm a copywriter. I'm an Infusionsoft consultant. I'm an archer. I haven't been shooting much recently, but I have a longbow that I shoot when it's a bit warmer. I'm also a barefoot runner, as I have also mentioned. There is a story behind that, which I won't go into now. But if you want to hear the story behind it, then you can either email me, or I think I tell the story in one of my welcome emails when you first sign up to my list. I'm also a stoic northern grump, which I'm sometimes tempted to trademark. I'm an occasional traveller. So last year we spent 2 months in Italy. So this is a photo of me running in Italy, although not barefoot running, I have to say. So this was in the hills up above Florence. I went up for a run on Easter Sunday and run up towards a town called Fiesole. So this is me running on my travels. As I mentioned, and I'm also now a father. I'm a believer in long walks. I believe that productivity doesn't always come from being at your desk and being switched on. I believe that productivity comes from having long walks and having time down. On my long walks, I like to binge listen to podcasts. I'm also a documentary binge watcher, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. Partly as a result of my time in Italy, I'm an espresso fan. And I'm a sports fan, so while we were in Florence, we spent a bit of time watching Fiorentina. I like football, rugby, cricket, and so there's quite a lot that defines who I am, other than me just being a copywriter, which is the headline thing. So I'll come back to this. You should hold all of these things in your mind, and we will come back to explain the relevance of them and explain the relevance to Maze 2.0 a little bit later on. So what is Maze 2.0? Maze 2.0 is effectively a replacement for the funnel analogy in marketing. So funnels are pretty much everywhere in marketing. Even the services that I use. So I use an SMS text messaging service called Fix Your Funnel. Services like ClickFunnels obviously draw on the funnel analogy. And I've used this analogy in the past. So when I did more AdWords work, I used to have an AdWords course called the AdWords Survival Guide. And in the AdWords Survival Guide, I used to talk about something called the AdWords Profit Funnel, which illustrated that when you're running ads on Google, you're actually paying for impressions, and then of those impressions you get clicks, and of those clicks you will hopefully get some conversions, and of those conversions you hopefully get some customer lifetime value. So the funnel is a way of splitting down your results into stages so that you can optimize between the particular stages. You can optimize your ads for click-through rate, you can optimize your landing pages for conversion rate, and you can optimize your follow-up sequences for customer lifetime value, which in itself is a very useful exercise. So I don't want to dismiss funnels. Funnels are a law of nature. This is the Pareto principle at work. But social media has basically changed the game, and the old way of thinking about funnels isn't as relevant in online marketing today as it was 10 years ago. you could also think about a funnel as it relates to email marketing. So if you think about the emails that you might have been sent prior to this webinar, I obviously sent a certain number of those emails. Some of those were delivered, fewer still were opened, fewer still were clicked. And then after this, fewer of you still will take the conversion offer at the end. And of those conversions, fewer of you still will provide, high customer lifetime value. And that's just how it is. That's the 80-20 principle. But what we end up doing with this is we end up reducing the whole world of marketing to a giant numbers game, where the whole point then is just to pour more people into the top of the funnel. And I think that's a big problem, because I think what this does is it encourages linear short-term thinking, and we end up only watching. So if we're adding all of these quote-unquote prospects into the funnel, we end up only paying attention to the people who are actively in buying mode. Whereas actually, when you're adding people into the funnel, some of those will be buyers, but some of them will also be browsers that aren't ready yet to buy, but they might become buyers one day if you can stay in contact with them for long enough. A funnel only, so a funnel only looks at whether someone progresses down the funnel. It doesn't ask why they didn't if they don't convert. If they don't convert, it just ignores them. And to me, that is a major problem, because we now have remarketing tools available on pretty much all social media platforms. And we need to be asking, if not asking questions, we need to have mechanisms in place to cater to the people who aren't immediately ready to buy, because they probably will be ready to buy one day with the right nurture and the right education and the right entertainment, if you can provide that. So yeah, the fundamental problem with funnels is we have people leaving at each stage of the funnel, and we're not really asking why. We're not really trying to get them back into the funnel. But there's also a whole level above the funnel as well that we can be addressing using the different social media tools available to us. So to explain this, Perry uses an analogy where Maze 1.0 is, so 10 years ago or 15 years ago, if you were to run a Google ad, and let's say you were selling an ebook, then you might have, a handful of ads on Google, and you would send people to a single landing page, and you would offer them a lead magnet to get them onto your email list, and you might send them a series of 6 emails and then sell a product at the end of that sequence. That is a funnel. It has very discrete steps, and maybe you even have a few of these lead magnets, and that is pretty much how most advertising. So I have been looking around at the ads that are on Facebook, and most ads actually still follow this model. You have a lead magnet, which often is badly thought through. Then they ask for your email address, even though you don't know them yet and you don't trust them yet. And then they email you, normally with very poor email, and essentially nag you to buy whatever it is that they're selling, and it just doesn't work anymore. In Maze 2.0, instead of using like a single lead magnet, what you're doing is you're building more of a tree. So you still have your core. So the core of the tree is like your core offers and your core follow-up sequences and that sort of thing. So all of those things still exist, but on the outside of the tree, we eventually break down to branches and leaves. And if you compare size for size, the energy creating capacity of a tree compared to a solar panel, the tree is far more effective. So that's really what we're doing in Maze 2.0. We're creating more of a web that is going to catch people earlier in the funnel and build trust and nurture people for a longer period of time. So after this webinar, when you've ordered your copy of the Marketing Nurture System, on page 63, you'll find a diagram like this. So rather than thinking in funnels, the way that I tend to explain it is that the outer boundary of this circle represents your world. So the point at which someone either opts into your database or buys something, becomes a customer, leaves the details at a trade show or whatever it is that you do to get leads, that is the point at which someone enters your world. At that point, we then have a conventional funnel. So you'll see that I've actually dropped in a tiny funnel in here. So we're then measuring the effectiveness of the progression down different stages. So something I explained in the marketing nurture system is that you might divide these stages into cold prospects who are outside of your world, nurture stages. So a nurture stage might be someone who buys your book, might be someone who watches a webinar. A training stage then is people who train specifically in how to do what you do. So people who come on my big story workshop engage in a degree of training with me. And then level 4 is what I call the Harley Davidson sale, or if you're in Yorkshire, the Harley Chuffing Davidson sale, which is the high value sale. It's the big ticket consulting gig. It's the super duper expensive product which you're trying to sell in the first place. And most marketing basically tries to get people to move from cold prospects to Harley Chuffing Davidson sale way too quickly. And actually what you find is that even though we model these out into funnels, people opt in and often they're just not ready to buy yet, and they kind of move and oscillate in and out around your world if you have the facilities to stay in touch with them. What Maze 2.0 does is it actually extends this nurture period to the pre-opt-in, because obviously there are way more people outside of your world than there are inside of your world. So if we can nurture people before they've opted in, then that's going to make all of our social media efforts and all of our social media ad spend a lot more effective. So what are the ingredients in the maze? Well, the first ingredient is to create free share-worthy content, and the keyword here, well, there's two keywords, and free is obviously means that they don't pay for it, but it also means that they don't pay for it with their contact details. They don't have to opt in. So basically what we're doing in Maze 2.0 is we're not immediately sticking an opt-in form in front of someone. The content that we give them should also be share-worthy. So you'll see down here that I've got a Facebook ad for a blog post, which is something that Amy Porterfield calls an epic blog post. So what I'm doing here is I'm selecting the very best of my daily emails and creating what she would call epic blog posts. So one of the ones that I had some traction with was about was a post I wrote about whiskey, and I talked about the Johnny Walker ads and why they work and how stories sell whiskey, not taste, which is true. And I only ran this, so I ran this ad to people who like Perry Marshall and whiskey, which is actually a surprising number of people. And the most interesting part that you need to pay attention to down here is the number of people who love it, like it, comment on it, and share it. So Facebook is making some changes to their algorithm, which you probably know about at the moment. But what you have to remember is that, like Google, the most important thing to Facebook is that Facebook provides an excellent user experience. So Facebook will prioritize ads, posts, whatever it is. They will prioritize content that people tend to like, comment, and share on. So whatever it is you're doing with your free share-worthy content, you have to get engagement with it. And actually, at this point, we're not measuring conversions. I did have a conversion option in here. So basically, when people went through to my blog post, there is a call to action on that landing page, and some people do opt into it, but that isn't really what I'm measuring. What I'm measuring is, does this ad get traction in terms of engagement? Because when people go through and read the blog post, I then cookie them, I add them to my remarketing list, and I add them to ingredient 2 of Maze 2.0, which is a virtual autoresponder. Before we move on to that, so what are the other free share-worthy content ideas that you can do? So you can do epic blog posts, you can do quizzes, surveys. I've had mixed results with quizzes and surveys, to be honest. I find that people, it depends a little bit what the niche is. I find that people generally don't want to complete marketing quizzes or copywriting quizzes. In regards to these things, people generally just want results. But for more niche things, so for archery, for something like yoga or things like that, people do take quizzes and surveys. Rants and raves, possibly my favourite thing to do is to rant and rave about things that annoy me, which is quite a lot of things. Because you might remember I'm a stoic northern grump. Another thing that you can do, which is related to the epic blog post, is to create a niche specific post. So I could create, I created a post about whiskey. I could create a post about barefoot running. I could create a post about archery. So these then target specific interests. And what we're doing here is we're adding more, one by one, we're adding more leaves to our tree. Ingredient 2 then is virtual autoresponders. So for someone who has seen my whiskey blog post and hasn't opted in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add them to a virtual autoresponder. If you're not familiar with the term autoresponder, autoresponders are typically email autoresponders, automated email sequences that you might send to people after they opt in, after they register for your lead magnet or download a report or buy something. So, but here what we're doing is we're creating autoresponders, but before someone has opted in. So at this point, all I know is that they've seen my Facebook ad, they've been to a particular page on my website and read a blog post about whiskey. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to create custom audiences in Facebook and custom combinations in AdWords, which does the same thing. So for the next 2 days, I want to run another article to them, and I can decide. I can test different things. I can test: do I want to introduce an offer where they enter their email address? Do I want to send them another article, which is another thing that I can do. So what I can do is a bit like you might plan out an email series. I can then plan out. So for the first 2 days after someone has seen my blog post, I'm going to show this post to them. And then for the next 2 days, I'm going to show a different post. And for the next 2 days, I'm going to show a different post. And then maybe for the next 2 days after that, I'm going to introduce an offer. And we can start to plan out a virtual autoresponder sequence. So in Facebook, what you would do is you would create a custom audience. So people who visited pages on my website that where the URL involves the word whiskey in the last 2 days. I would also then create a custom audience for people who viewed my whiskey page in the last 4 days. So then what I can do is I can, in the targeting settings in Facebook, I can say I want to run. So if I'm targeting people who viewed the whiskey article 3 or 4 days ago, I can say I want to target people who are in the whiskey 4 days audience, but exclude people in the whiskey 2 days audience. So that's how you start to create these virtual autoresponders, and that means that we're moving the whole nurture period back in time, earlier on. We're essentially flirting with people before they've even opted in, which is a really powerful thing, and I think really what tools like Facebook are really made for. So really what we're talking about here is we're talking about a merging of branding and direct response, because we're not immediately placing an opt-in form in front of someone. It's a bit like if you were to come to my workshop, and at the start of the workshop, I just plonk down an order form for a project in front of you and ask you to fill your credit card details in. And while I could play this numbers game, and maybe like 1 or 2 people at the workshop might go ahead and fill in their credit card details, most people just won't. And really what we're doing here is we're taking a less direct approach, but in a way that ultimately is going to earn us more money. Because I think what most people are acknowledging is that the direct response, the sort of pure direct response where we just put lead magnets in front of people and make offers to people, it just doesn't work so well on Facebook. And people on Facebook are not paying a huge amount of attention to offers. They're on Facebook to avoid buying stuff and to avoid being marketed to. You will find that social traffic is fairly casual. Often people are on Facebook while they're watching TV, while they're in bed. I dread to think actually, but perhaps even while they're driving. So don't expect too much from a single interaction. So if you think about what we're doing with these virtual autoresponders, we're getting in front of people, but we're not expecting too much at any given time. It's a longer run game. But what it means is that because we're targeting people based on the fact that they've been on our website, and we're targeting people based on the fact that they've viewed specific content on our website. This means that for the people that we cookie and for the people that we add to our remarketing lists, we end up being seen everywhere because you're remarketing to them on Google, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram. And most people don't really understand that much about remarketing. And unless you're selling to marketers, most people will just think that you're really big and that you're just appearing everywhere. Whereas actually you're being very savvy about the remarketing ads that you run, and you're not immediately slamming an order form in front of them. I'm not the only person talking about this. So Mr. Social Media, Gary Vaynerchuk, has a book called Jab, 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 Right Hook. And in this book, what Vaynerchuk says is that all of these posts that I'm talking about, where you're sending people to a blog post and you're not immediately expecting an opt-in or a sale, these are called jabs. And then the right hook is the offer. So what the jabs do is the jabs prepare the ground and build the trust and build a relationship for the right hook, which is the offer at the right time. So it's essentially a nurture period, and I'm not the only one talking about this. And Gary Vee does it very well on all of these different social media platforms, and I do recommend that you read his book. I'm a bit take or leave Gary Vaynerchuk. It's not quite my style, but I think you know what? I think he has a point. So the bottom line is that you can't ignore branding. I know this is almost like sacrilege in the direct marketing world, but it's really true. And when you tell stories about your business, effectively you're branding yourself. You're creating an image of them. You're creating an impression of your brand in people's minds, and that is really important. So what are the challenges in building Maze 2.0? Well, there's a few. So first of all, you need to have a technical understanding of Facebook, of pixels, of audiences. You can learn that yourself. You can learn it from Perry Marshall. I have a few other options if you want to get someone to do that for you. More fundamentally, though, the big problem is content, because you have to tell better stories. And as you're sending people to these epic blog posts and niche specific posts and quizzes and that sort of thing, you can't introduce your business the same way every time. You have to be telling different stories about your business, and you have to be drawing on a deeper well of vulnerability if you really want to connect with people. So remember, we're trying to build a tree here, or we're trying to grow a tree maybe rather than build a tree, and you're going to need a lot of leaves. So you're going to need a broader range of stories. So most people don't tell a very broad range of stories about their work. They maybe have an origin story, and a story of how the founders came to start the business. But there's actually a much broader, much more interesting range of stories available to you than that. And ultimately, you have to start thinking like a publisher. So you have to get into the habit of just publishing these posts, not getting too detached to the outcome, and not getting too despondent or too depressed when you put up an epic blog post and it just doesn't get the engagement that you thought it would. Which sounds silly, but it's a very real thing. Sometimes we get too attached to the outcome of the stories that we're putting out there, and the reality is that you just have to put out a lot of stories, and we don't know which ones are going to work. So where are all these stories going to come from? Where is all this content going to come from? Well, do you remember all of this? I started off this webinar by saying that I'm a copywriter, Infusionsoft consultant, traveler, grump, believer in long walks. These are all potential story ideas that I can write about. And what I have at True Story Selling is a methodology for taking these inputs and converting them into things like Facebook posts and emails and so on. That means that you can start to nurture people both on your email list, but also now before your email list, before they've opted in, with interesting content and without ever running out of things to say and things to write about. which if you sell to people over a long period of time, if you sell high value products, is really important. So how does the funnel now look? So the old funnel looks like this. So you have your traffic up here. So maybe you bought clicks on Facebook or Google or Twitter or wherever, and you drove people into your funnel. So the AdWords version of this would be, you might buy impressions, and then you got some clicks, and then you got some conversions, and then you got some customer lifetime value. Well, the new funnel now looks like this, because we have all of our epic blog posts. We have our free share-worthy content here that is engaging people and nurturing people before they've even opted in, before they've actually entered your world. At the same time, we're acknowledging that people do leave the funnel for all sorts of valid and good reasons, and that isn't to say just because they're not going to be a customer right now that we don't want to stay in contact with them. And so rather than just relying too heavily on email, which most companies do, I probably do to a degree, rather than just relying on email, we're then pushing people into custom audiences and using some of the social networks available to us to drop people back into the funnel again when they're ready for it. So you might be asking, who does this work for? Are there any types of business where this model doesn't work for? So something that I've been talking about a lot recently is one of my favorite copywriting books is a book called Great Leads, The 6 Easiest Ways to Start Any Sales Message by Michael Masterson and John Ford. And in Great Leads, they have a diagram like this, which is based on Eugene Schwartz's levels of awareness, where everyone that enters your world, everyone that ever sees your Facebook posts or your ads or whatever it is, they all have a different level of awareness about you and your products. So at the starting point, they might be completely unaware that they even have the problem that you solve. And then as we work up the scale, they might be aware that they've got the problem, but not the solution. So Lindsay, for example, my wife, is aware of the problem of dirty dishes, but is not aware of any solutions to the problem. As we move up the scale, I'm very brave when I'm on webinars sometimes. As we move up the awareness scale, customers then become aware of different solutions. And then we become aware of specific products. So I'm aware of the fact that I would like a nicer motorbike. I'm aware of Harley Davidson, as I've already mentioned, Harley Davidson. But I'm not, in a position at the moment to buy one. So, I am a product aware buyer. And then obviously here we have the most aware of all, and these are people who are practically placing an order. So if you sell something where everyone understands what it is, then most of your buyers will be in this most aware stage. And actually, in this, when people are most aware, you probably want to lead with an offer rather than leading with a story or an indirect approach. A lot of the stuff we're talking about here is indirect. Instead of putting an offer in front of someone immediately and slamming them with an order form or an opt-in form, we are nurturing them. We're putting blog posts in front of them. We're putting quizzes in front of them. We're taking a less direct approach. So you do need to think about this. If everyone understands everything about what you do, so if you are a painter and decorator, for example, pretty much everyone knows what painting and decorating is. So this becomes less relevant. Although the fact that everyone knows what it is that you do means that you're probably going to end up in a lot of competition, because people will just compare you. That they'll go to Google and they'll compare you with 17 million other painters and decorators. So actually, the way to differentiate yourself is to tell more of your story. But it just means that the exact nature of the maze will change, and you'll probably have a much smaller tree than someone like me, where I'm trying to sell to people who are less aware of what it is that I'm selling. So I think rather than saying is this right for you or not, it's a question of determining how aware your buyers are, and that will determine how big your Maze 2.0 tree needs to be.